But one thing I always come back to is, so many of you have heard of E. Raymond Wilson, who was the very first General Secretary of FCNL, appointed in 1943. And when he wrote a letter accepting the job, he wrote that we ought to be willing to work for causes which will not be won now, but can only be won if we work for them energetically over a period of time. And that is really the philosophy that has been with FCNL for more than 80 years, that the things we're working for, a world free of war and the threat of war, a place where every person's potential can be fulfilled, an earth restored, these are things that are not going to happen quickly in one piece of legislation, and so we need to keep that vision and then see what are the ways that we can move it forward in the political situation that we're in. And the work we're doing in Gaza around US policy and how do we help is just one example of how we're trying to balance that prophetic vision and the practical realities that we're working in. I also just want to share a little bit about sort of how we see change happening. A question I get a lot is, how do you do this? Washington is so frustrating, and aren't you just running your head against a wall all the time? And sometimes it feels that way. We have a great community of staff and people like you all around the country doing this work with us, which is really what keeps me going. But when we talk about sort of our theory of change or how we see change happening, we talk about being grounded in the Quaker belief that there is that of God in everyone and engaging legislatures through deep listening and storytelling. Part of what we do in a lobby visit is ask questions and not go in assuming someone is going to disagree with everything we say, and try to learn from them as much as we tell them what we think should happen. And sometimes that leads to openings that go in very unexpected directions. We create space for a way forward even amidst division. We collaborate with a diverse network of people who share our concerns to build constructive relationships with federal representatives and foster cross-partisan support for our policy priorities. By combining the expertise of seasoned lobbyists with the power of an engaged grassroots community, we will shift federal policy toward the world we seek. So the word relationship shows up a lot. It shows up in what holds us together in doing this work and what helps ground us, and it shows up in the way that we approach meeting and working with our legislators. And another important word, and particularly important for the work that I do, is this word integrity. Quakers talk about that a lot, thinking about what do we believe and how does that belief affect everything from how we go into a congressional meeting, how we ask for that meeting, how we communicate with our legislatures, to how do we as a staff relate to each other. And I work in a part of the organization that is the governance, community, and culture team. And so we think a lot about how does our governance, how does our Quaker values show up in that work, and how do we have practicing what we preach. And I believe very strongly that it's the small interpersonal interactions that build up into the world that we're trying to bring into fruition. So that is a little bit about FCNL and sort of the approach that we take and the way that we do our work and think about being a Quaker organization working with one of the most hierarchical and in some ways oppressive systems in our country, that of the US Congress. And so I'm gonna turn this over to Hassan to talk more about sort of what that looks like and some of the work that he's been involved in.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, one more thing. So while Hassan is talking, I'm gonna pass around a sign-in sheet. If you could just put your name, contact information if you don't think we have it. If you're already on our email list, that's fine, but we'd just love to know that you were here so that when we go back to FCNL, people know that this was a successful workshop. Thanks.
And I'd like to add that I'm going to send one around too for ISCL. So if you're already on the ISCL mailing list, you don't have to do that. But if you're not, we'd love to have you on.
Thanks, Alicia. Appreciate that. And thank you, Diana, for having me. So I'm going to take, I wasn't going to start off this way, but you just started off so personally. And I learned so much about you, and I thought I'd maybe share a little bit about why I'm here and why I started doing this work. My name in Arabic means beautiful, Hassan. Some people think it's a misnomer. But it also meant I'd be a target for a lot of hate and racism in my town in Plymouth. People, this was before 9/11, people were not super inclusive, even members of my own family, my Italian Finnish side. Good food. But, so it hurt, it made me feel less than, made me feel othered. And then I saw 9/11 happen. I was in my college dorm room. The planes hit the Twin Towers. And immediately I'm thinking, oh my God, my dad, my Jordanian father, my Sunni Muslim father is in New York. I'm worried about him. And then people started accusing me of having something to do with it. I'm like, no, I'm an American. I'm worried about my dad. And I had to explain this to people, and it was really disconcerting. And I spent 4 years studying politics. And then I realized after that I didn't want anything to do with politics, as you would naturally, assume, because it was horrible. I didn't want us to be involved in the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. I saw all these civilians being hurt by U.S. bombs, and I decided to be a full-time musician. And I toured the country for a while. I didn't actually play in Indiana. I should have. But I played a lot of music, and I wasn't called back to politics until, I started seeing the aftermath of these wars in the Middle East. In fact, my cousin was Muath, the Jordanian Air Force pilot that crash landed in Syria, was captured by ISIS and murdered. It was absolutely horrible. I never met him, so I can't say I have a personal connection to this individual, but my dad did, my whole family did. And they were so upset, they were mortified, and I remembered back to my days in college about how we destabilized Iraq, we destabilized Syria, and that we, while we're not 100%, nothing simple, as everyone here knows, but I knew that we, as the U.S., played a role in destabilizing this region, which allowed for extremism to fester. And I thought, now is maybe a time to dust off that poli-sci degree and get back involved. So I moved to Chicago. I worked at the Chicago Peace Action, moved to D.C., started working on the war in Yemen. I want to tell a brief story about that because then kind of leads us right into what I'm doing now on Gaza. I start a lot of my talks about Yemen. What does AOC, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Koch Institute, the Heritage Foundation, and the Raging Grannies all have in common? Come on. Nobody? No. Okay. They all support ending U.S. military aid to the Saudi-led coalition's war in Yemen. And so, because there's a humanitarian crisis, because this hadn't been authorized, we were able to, in 3 months after I moved to Capitol Hill, first War Powers Act in U.S. history. It was 50 years since 1973 that had passed. So I started to learn, oh my God, this is incredible. You can do big things if you work across the aisle, if you work with people that don't have a lot in common. And then right after that happened, FCNL called me up and they said, hey, do you want to come work with us? And then shortly thereafter, we saw the Hodeidah ceasefire. The UAE pulled out of the war in Yemen. For the most part, they're still kind of there at Socotra. But we won't get into all those details. But I saw that the work that we were doing on the Hill was making a change. So I worked with FCNL, and I obviously was working on Palestine, but I thought, this is such a stuck issue. Let's see if we can make a little progress, and through this work on Yemen, maybe we can open up some channels to make vote and debate on a given topic. Flash forward October 7. I wake up, and I'm just like, oh my God, all hell's breaking loose. And for folks watching Gaza, watching the West Bank, we knew this was a ticking time bomb. I was there actually a year earlier at the Ramallah Friends School. I left the day Shireen Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera journalist, was killed by an Israeli sniper. So I had seen firsthand how unstable the situation was, and knew that we needed to take action. And then October 7 happens, and it was just heartbreaking. I had hired an Israeli woman to be my program assistant that year at FCNL, and her ex-boyfriend was actually killed at the Nova Festival. It's absolutely horrible. 2 of her friends were taken into Gaza and being held hostage. And also, several of her friends, Palestinian friends in Gaza, they cut off communication because of the airstrikes, because of the blockade, and so I'm seeing this woman, Adelia, she's devastated. And a lot of my other friends were devastated on both sides, and really just a heartbreaking moment. So FCNL, as we do, we're kind of, when I got to DC, I noticed something about the Palestine advocacy. There's a lot of people that kind of are working on this. It's a pretty saturated space. But I realized something, that no one's talking to each other. So we got the Jewish groups over here, we got the Muslim groups, we got the Christian groups, we got the anti-war groups, human rights, humanitarian, so on and so forth. And I noticed that there wasn't a shared strategy. So what we did is we said, well, let's try to change that. Let's try to bring these voices together and start working on this issue, because, and you know, the Quaker umbrella, everyone kind of trusts us. They're like, you know what, you're older than the occupation. Come on over here. It's fine. So we were able to build the U.S. ceasefire coalition, and Odelia and I are now co-chairing that U.S. coalition. We have a very simple goal with very clear values. We want an immediate and a permanent ceasefire because we don't think war's the answer in Gaza. And we also reject violence against any civilians, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian. And we say, if you can agree to that, come on in. Ahlan wa sahlan. I know I have a horrible accent. That means welcome in Arabic. And you're totally welcome to be here. So we have Jihad Abu Salim, myself, and Odelia. So we have a Palestinian, an Israeli, and their Arab Jordanian friend, Hassan. We're doing this every week, and we're really doing something I think that's unprecedented, in coalition, not just us, but really like this larger coalition. We're about 150 national orgs right now, but there's so much going on to try to end this war, to try to achieve the permanent ceasefire, to get humanitarian access to people that need it, and to make sure that U.S. weapons are never used to violate international law or U.S. law. Pretty simple. And I tell a lot of people that, oh, you're just singling out Israel. I'm like, you weren't paying attention. We were hammering Saudi Arabia for years trying to get them to stop bombing and blockading Yemen because that was immoral. That was unjust. We're just applying U.S. law evenly and fairly. That's what we're about. So what have we done? We've been able to get about 100 members of Congress calling for the immediate permanent ceasefire. We chip away one at a time. And we've got about 130 members now saying that we need to condition weapons on human rights to the government of Israel. So we're making some progress. In January, I actually traveled to Palestine with Bridget. I went to the Ramallah Friends School. I was in the region for about 3 weeks. It was, that first trip was intense. This was the most intense trip I had ever been on. We went with Churches for Middle East Peace. There was about 10 or so heads of denomination. They allowed one lobbyist on the trip. I don't know why. That's me, by the way. And And we went to speak with different faith denominations, Christians, Muslim, Jews. We went to speak, just civil society, the U.S. Embassy over there. But really the thing that touched me the most was going to the Ramallah Friends School. I spent about a week. They have a little apartment there. And I stayed, had coffee with Rania, Maya, the headmaster. She's incredible. And every morning I did an assembly with the students. And there was a different grade every morning, so like 3rd, 4th, 5th, all the way up to 8th grade. And I had this whole speech ready to go. I was going to tell them what we're up to. I was going to really, talk about U.S. law and policies. And I get up there, I'm standing up there with the microphone, and I usually have stuff to say, as you might have noticed. But I said, I don't really have anything to say to them. Like, what am I going to say? My government is complicit in their suffering, in their pain, in their tears. So I said, folks, I told them who I was, what I was doing. And I said, I want you to tell me what I need to know about your lives. And one after another, kids raised their hand. In fact, the Ramallah Friends grad, who was paralyzed in that hate crime in Vermont, his 3rd grade cousin gets up in front of all his classmates, right in the front row, and he starts sobbing while the microphone's in his hand and the microphone's shaking. And his teacher gives him a hug, and he says, why does America and Americans support these crimes of hate against Palestinians? And it wasn't like accusatory, it was just like, I don't understand. Like his 3rd grade mind just couldn't understand, why would someone attack a person just for wearing a keffiyeh or for just for being Palestinian? And, that really stayed with me. And I didn't have a good answer. I'm like, I don't know why we're supporting this. I mean, I understand money in politics, I didn't want to get into all that. But I said, I apologized on behalf of America. I hope that was okay. And I said, I'm sorry, and that there, as bad as it is, there are a lot of people that are trying to work on this. We care about Palestinian children. We love the Ramallah Friends School. We want to support you. And, we want more stories so we can be able to share these stories with our lawmakers. And so one after another, one girl left me a note and put it in the office for me, saying genocide, ceasefire to give the kids of Gaza some relief. So that was my Ramallah Friends story. On the last day of my trip, I went with... Oh yeah, he's my sound man. The last day of my trip, I went to Jerusalem and I went to UNRWA. Do you know the UN Relief and Works Agency? They have been providing humanitarian, maybe not quite as long as the Quakers have in Gaza, but they've been doing a lot of work for Palestinian refugees for a long, long time. So I went to their headquarters in Jerusalem and saw their facilities, and they actually gave me a ride to my family's house in Madaba through the crossing. And while I was there was this woman, Nisreen. She was doing a lot of the donations work for UNRWA. And she told me all these stories as we were kind of bouncing along on this trip, and one that really kind of hit me. She said, in my off time, a lot of my UNRWA colleagues, what we're doing is we're working with the embassies of Oman, of Jordan, of Cairo, of the Egyptian embassy, Turkey, and they're working to one by one evacuate children out of Gaza. And these are kids with severe burns, amputated limbs without anesthesia. These are traumatic cases, and because they're so traumatic, they're able to get visa status to get evacuated, and so they've been able in total to get about 50 children out. Unfortunately, since May 7, they've closed the Rafah crossing, so this has been a lot more difficult doing the medical evacuations. But she said something that I think every American really needs to know, that there's a hospital in Florida that they can actually start getting some of these kids to, that will take Palestinian kids from Gaza to do some of this emergency treatment. But the families of Gaza, a lot of them say they don't want to come here because they're afraid of us. And they're afraid that doctors won't treat them well, so they'd prefer to go to Oman, go to, go elsewhere. And that also just stuck with me. That doesn't feel right. Does that feel right to you? I don't know. It
Many people in the world consider the United States a war mongering, but what's most of our money go to?
exactly. Am I running?
I have to cut something for a second. She asked a question a good while ago, and got people that have to go. So
Okay.
can we interrupt for a minute?
Yeah.
And take off again? So
Yeah, I was actually right about to get into this call to action. Oh, okay. Okay.
And then you can tell your wife that we were fairly nice people, but we did hold you hostage.
Yeah, yeah.
We're retaining you with love.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to say three things, and I'm going to make one thing relevant to Indiana because, we have to really be clear about who we're talking to and be flexible. So our big asks are getting public statements from members of Congress to call for the ceasefire and to put pressure, to call for this. So that's one. We need to prohibit U.S. weapons from going to the government of Israel. So we're tracking statements, but we're also pushing for new legislation. There's about to be a new bill called the Embargo for Peace Act that we're building more and more support for. So when that's introduced, we'd love co-sponsorship. Last but not least, we're also working with Rep. Carson, our friend from Indianapolis. I'm on the phone with their staff quite a lot. And they're trying to restore funding to UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency. And so when that's live, we would love to get co-sponsors. And if you're in Indianapolis and Rep. Carson's, your guy, it would be great to just shower him with love because he does get a lot of pushback when he does things that support humanitarian relief for Palestinians. So again, 3 is like getting members to call for the ceasefire, to cut off weapons. I know that's tough. It's tough in this political climate, but that's the ask. We don't think we should be complicit anymore. And then supporting the UNRWA Emergency Funding Restoration Act. So those are the big 3. And then specifically for folks in Indiana, let's show Rep. Carson a little bit of love. I have one that I think is really important for Senator Young, though, because, again, these are difficult issues. I do think in the low-hanging fruit, like, there are some things that we can do to help. I would love Senator Young to do a letter or a statement calling for the USS Mercy and the USS Comfort to be pulled into the waters off Gaza. So we have a hospital ship or 2 hospital ships ready and willing to take these medical evacuations, and save lives. And I think that's actually a doable ask for Senator Young. I think he would do that if enough constituents came forward and asked for that. So, and maybe if you want to say a little bit more, we'd love to hear it.
I appreciate it. I'll be very brief. My family still lives there. Mom, dad, siblings, cousins. I have over 200 family members all over the West Bank, not in Gaza. So it's one of the most difficult times for me personally to be a state senator with 0 influence over foreign policy, because at the local level we can't engage in foreign affairs or policy, immigration, or national security. These are things that are at the Congress level. But I think what you can do in addition to these amazing suggestions, I think charitable contributions, while currently extremely difficult because Gaza is almost closed, I don't think you can get anything in. I have seen few individuals from Indiana who have personal family members who live in Egypt, who knows someone in Gaza who might have some supplies, and they would tell them, can you please donate on my behalf 10 cans of X, Y, or Z? And, so it's extremely difficult. So I'm not sure, I have no knowledge of how you can send aid. I think maybe your organization can provide at any point when there are, methods to send money there. But the most effective thing I would say currently, this is a global issue, not just a United States issue. So many players are engaged in this that it's above and beyond what just, we can do locally, but what we can do is impact Senator Young, because he has a very influential role that he can play representing Indiana. I don't think he might get much help or support or love from Jim Banks on this issue. But I think that would be one. I think second, depending on where you live, if you have friends in other districts in Indiana, I'm talking about local state Senate districts and local House districts, it is extremely important to reach out to those folks and say, we would love for you to talk to your party, because actually the National Republican Party just released their platform, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and they have almost unconditional support for the state of Israel and all that stuff. So who shapes and who votes on that platform? National delegates. Well, who are the national delegates? National delegates to the Republican convention are people from each state who get elected. So tomorrow, for example, in Indianapolis, I am a state delegate to the state Democratic convention. Tomorrow in Indianapolis, they will be meeting from 9 o'clock till 3, 2. So we have to vote for our candidate for lieutenant governor, our candidate for attorney general, and also for the national delegates of the Democratic Party. And I've been getting text message after text message, please support me, endorse me for tomorrow. So it becomes important for all of us to hold these national delegates accountable to who they will support. So please don't discredit the idea of speaking with local elected officials about these issues. The second thing that the Friends community can help with, education. I think conflict resolution, love and compassion does not exist in vacuum. I'm a Muslim. I live in a district that I represent the largest Jewish community in the state of Indiana. And guess who's my congressperson? Andre Carson. So 2 Muslims represent the largest Jewish community in the state of Indiana. And to engage in education and to be professional and to do our due diligence because we represent all citizens, to tell them that we want peace, we want resolution to the conflict, and we don't want to be complicit in genocide and complicit in atrocities or acts of war that our nation is engaged in, is important to educate your local legislators. I took that part on me when I meet with members of the Jewish community in my district. They frequently ask me where you stand on this issue. I say, if you speak from both sides of your mouth on human rights and love and compassion, then I think we have more work to do before we get to the issue of Palestine and Israel. I spoke a lot about grace. Similar to you, I would not, from a faith perspective, from an individual perspective, from a human perspective, I do not support, I do not condone, and I will never support any human who will take the life of a civilian like what happens over there or anywhere across the globe. And I refuse the simplistic argument that their wars will yield in disastrous things and casualties and all that. Well, if we stopped the war from the beginning, we wouldn't be here today. And for over 70 years, 75 years, that conflict has been ongoing. If you see a group of people persistent in demanding something for decades after decades after decades, even if you have no clue what the conflict is about, it should tell you that a persistent group of people demanding something, there must be something right about it throughout history, not just recently. And as long as there's occupation, and as long as you're taking freedom away from people, any people anywhere in the United States, across the globe, in Palestine, anywhere you go, then you are funding, you are supporting, you are enhancing aggression against a group of people. Unfortunately, in our nation, when we as Democrats speak about issues of injustice, sometimes we get accused of that we hate America. So when I had to fight against the piece of legislation that said you can't speak about slavery, we were accused that we hate America and we want to teach our kids that America is not a good nation, which is absolutely not true. I love the United States, I'm a proud citizen, and I will support my country in every way I can. But as Dr. King did when he opposed the war in Vietnam, he quoted the philosopher Dante and he said, I reserve the deepest place in hell for those who remain silent in time of a great moral crisis. And the work that both of you do, the work that the Friends community do, is extremely important in education, sending relief support when possible, but most powerful thing is engaging with our federal representatives to convince them, if you're not going to support peace, if you're not going to support, limitations on funding genocide and all of that, then we should not vote for you, and we should work to replace you with someone who can do better. I'm so sorry. I'm probably one of those most that feel I'm very hopeful. I always lean on the side of hopefulness, but with this specific issue, I feel crippled. And the reason that I feel crippled is that on a daily basis, every morning I speak with my mom and dad. And when I speak with them, I don't have a tool, one single tool on earth. I wish I have a magic wand that can wave and resolve the whole issue. But it is so much complicated on a global level that it's not as simple as, for me, for example, some people thought when I first got elected that I can text Biden and tell him, and I joked, I said, yeah, he's my buddy, let me text him for you. But this is a tragic situation, and it will not get resolved even if they reach a short-term agreement until the root cause issue is resolved. And you play a critical role in education and holding our federal elected officials accountable on foreign policy issues.
Well, thank you for that. We have a lot of work to do. If you haven't been to Palestine, I really think you should. If you can make the trip, obviously, if you can't, no worries either. But going there, understanding what life is like in the West Bank with the settlements, what's going on in Hebron, it just being there in person, it just brings a new urgency to the matter. When, I went there, around the time Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, I went to Hebron and just saw really horrible things. And, this Palestinian family, they went to go get groceries, they come back, there's a settler family in their first floor apartment. And all of a sudden, their home is now being occupied. They have nowhere to go. So these things happen every day. Our taxpayer dollars are funding it. And I think it's unacceptable. So I'm just going to say two more things because there are a couple updates that I think folks should know. In the past few days, there were evacuation orders in Gaza City where hundreds of thousands of people were told again, after multiple times fleeing their homes, they were told again to leave to a different part of the Gaza Strip. There is no safe place in Gaza right now. 90% of the population in Gaza has already been internally displaced multiple times. You've got famine all over the Gaza Strip now, according to the World Food Program and Samantha Power, USAID administrator. So we know there's a famine, and we're still blocking humanitarian assistance, right? So that's why I would love to partner with each and every one of you. There's that sign-up sheet. If you sign up there, we'd love to work with you to take follow-up action, to get Senator Young, to hopefully bring in the USS Comfort and USS Mercy to the coast of Gaza so we can start saving kids and families from absolutely horrific circumstances. And last but not least, not to make it even more complicated, but Israel and Hezbollah have been fighting back and forth since the start of this war. 74,000 exchanges have happened since October 7. Massive conflict. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis and Lebanese, much more dangerous situation than we already are. We've moved 3 aircraft carriers into the Eastern Mediterranean, and rather than the USS Wasp, which has a bunch of warplanes, how about the USS Mercy, which has a bunch of doctors? That's what I'm about. That's what I hope we can work on together. I am so grateful for this opportunity to speak with everybody today, and just so inspired by you doing what you're doing, and Diana and the whole crew, and Mary, really by all of you. And if you have questions, happy to answer, but let's keep in touch and let's keep it up.
Yeah, I want to thank Patty, certainly, Hassan, Alicia. Mary and Phil, we call ourselves a three-legged stool with IFCL. We speak almost every day by some form of communication, and we try to, and Deb too. Clark has to listen to me all the time. And any of you who want to help us and let us help you to help them, there's much work to be done. And we're little, but we can do it. We can do that. Shall we close in prayer? Gracious God, we are so grateful for this time to discuss some of the problems and think about things that we can do to serve you and your people. Amen.
I've been asked to make a quick announcement for dinner. It would help the line if a few of us would be willing to go pass through the back of the yearly meeting room and down those stairs, if you're able, and then to join into